In the golden fields of Kenya, my story begins, a tale of love, loss, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. My name is Amina, and this is my odyssey across continents, cultures, and climates, driven by a silent tide of desperation and hope. From the simplicity and warmth of a farming life in Kenya to the cold, unforgiving streets of London, I faced the extremities of human cruelty and kindness. I navigated through deserts and across oceans, battled exploitation and indifference, and clung to the memories of my husband, Kamau, from whom I was heartbreakingly separated. In this harrowing yet uplifting narrative, I share with you the joys of my early life, the pain of losing everything, the horrors of human trafficking and enslavement, the perilous journey across the Sahara and the Mediterranean, and the loneliness of being an asylum seeker in Europe. This is not just my story. It is a reflection of the struggles faced by millions of climate refugees around the world, forced from their homes by a changing planet and seeking refuge in lands that often turn them away. I invite you to step into my shoes, to feel the blistering heat of the Sahara sun on your back, to taste the salty spray of the Mediterranean, and to experience the biting cold of a London winter. This is my testimony, a call to action, and a plea for understanding and empathy in a world that often seems devoid of both. Chasing Rain, the journey of a climate refugee. Chapter 1. From the simple joys of a farming life in Kenya to a fight for survival. In the sultry heat of a Kenyan summer, the air heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and ripening fruits, our farm was a sanctuary of life, a stark contrast to the barren wasteland it would become. The story of how our thriving land, full of laughter and love, transformed into a mere memory, echoes the story of our journey from the comfort of our homeland to the cruel embrace of Nairobi, the city that promised hope but delivered despair. This is not just a recounting of events, it is a testament to our struggle, a chronicle of our fight against the forces that sought to break our spirit. My name is Amina. I am a 24-year-old woman, currently living somewhere in the vast, sprawling city of London, England. But my journey here has been far from straightforward. I am a prisoner of circumstances, a faceless entity in an unfamiliar land, the lowest of the low, the scum of the earth in the eyes of many. I am waiting to see what fate awaits me, far away from home, far away from everything I once held dear. 6 years ago, my life was different. 6 years ago, I was not just another face in the crowd. I was a daughter, a wife, a hopeful soul working under the brilliant African sun in my homeland, Kenya. I was happy, tending to our family farm, just married to the love of my life, Kamau. This is my story. The story begins in the lush green landscapes of our village in Rift Valley, Kenya, the place where my heart is still nestled. Kamau and I were childhood sweethearts. We had known each other since we were toddlers, playing in the red dirt and sharing dreams under the wide blue Kenyan sky. We grew up together, tending to our family's farms, studying under the shade of the acacia tree, and slowly falling in love. Our love story was simple, as beautiful and uncomplicated as the sunflower fields that surrounded our village. We pledged our love under the ancient baobab tree, vowing to stand by each other come what may. We were married in a traditional ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who danced with us until the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars came out. It was a joyful time, filled with laughter, music, and the hope of a bright future together. Life on the farm was hard but rewarding. We woke up at dawn to the crowing of roosters and the mooing of cows, ready for a day of hard work. We tilled the land, sowed the seeds, and watched as life sprang forth from the rich earth. We battled pests, disease, and occasionally drought, but we always managed to pull through. The land was fertile, the rains timely, and our harvests plentiful. Our farm was a beautiful patchwork of wheat, maize, and sugarcane fields, intersected by tiny streams that danced with the African sun. At the end of the day, As the sun set and cast a warm orange glow over the land, we felt a sense of satisfaction, a sense of purpose. The sight of our crops swaying gently in the breeze was our reward, the fruit of our toil. We were connected to the land, and it provided for us. We lived in a small mud brick house on the edge of our farm, surrounded by mango and baobab trees. In the evenings, as the crickets began their symphony, we would sit outside, watching the fireflies dance under the starlit sky. Kamal would often play his homemade nyatiti, a traditional Kenyan instrument, while I would lean against him, soaking in the music and the tranquility of our little corner of the world. Yes, life was simple then, but it was our life, our little piece of paradise. We were content, grateful for our blessings. We were filled with dreams, hopes for our future, for our family we planned to raise. We were two bodies with one soul, united in our love, our aspirations, and our respect for the land that sustained us. But as the years passed, our joy began to fade, replaced by an unsettling worry. We watched as our once fertile lands slowly turned arid, as the rivers and streams that once teemed with life began to dry up. The rains became unpredictable, the droughts longer and more severe. Our harvests began to dwindle, and with it, our hopes for a secure future. Little did we know, our journey had just begun, a journey filled with trials and tribulations, heartbreak and loss, resilience and courage. It was the start of our exodus, our voyage from the warmth of the African sun to the cold shadows of an uncertain future in a foreign land. This is my story. This is our story. As the earth grew parched and lifeless beneath the harsh African sun, the desperate whispers of a prolonged drought turned into the loud wails of starvation. The rivers ran dry, the crops withered and died, and our cattle succumbed to the merciless heat. The vibrant hues of our land faded away, replaced by a monotonous canvas of brown. The cruel hands of drought had snatched away our source of sustenance, our livelihood. Our once fertile lands were now as barren as the Sahara Desert. With no hope for a harvest and unable to provide for ourselves, we made the heart-wrenching decision to leave our farm, our home, our village, everything we had ever known. A drought-induced exodus was underway, and we, like many others, were forced to leave our roots behind in search of survival. Our destination was Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, a place we had only ever heard about in stories and seen on the grainy television at the village market. The journey to Nairobi was our first real encounter with the harsh realities of climate change. We travelled in an old rickety bus, packed like sardines, each carrying a burden of despair, anxiety, and fading hope. I remember looking out of the window, the landscape gradually changing from rural to urban, from open fields and expansive skies to crowded streets and towering buildings. The sun, our once nurturing mother, now felt like a ruthless taskmaster, heating up the metal body of the bus and adding to our discomfort. Arriving in Nairobi was a sensory overload. The cacophony of honking cars, bustling crowds, and the harsh smell of vehicle exhaust was jarring. We were just two specks in this sea of humanity, strangers in a strange land. The city was a stark contrast to our tranquil village. Nairobi was harsh, intimidating, and unforgiving, yet it held the promise of survival, however meager that might be. Finding shelter was our first challenge. With our limited resources, we ended up in Kibera, the city's largest slum, a sprawling mass of tin shacks and narrow, dirt-filled alleys. It was a far cry from our little mud brick house surrounded by fields and trees. The air here was heavy with the smell of sweat, filth, and desperation. It was a world that knew nothing of privacy or comfort, where basic amenities like clean water and electricity were luxuries that few could afford. Life in Kibera was a daily struggle. Kamal found work as a manual labourer, hauling heavy sacks of cement in construction sites, his body growing leaner and more exhausted with each passing day. I found work as a domestic help in a wealthy Kenyan home, scrubbing floors and washing dishes from dawn to dusk. The irony was not lost on me that while I could barely afford a meal a day, I was cooking extravagant dishes for a family that wasted more food than they consumed. The city was bursting at its seams with people from all over Kenya, and neighboring countries too, all seeking refuge from the onslaught of climate change. Food was scarce, water even scarcer, and conflict was inevitable. Tensions flared over the slightest of issues, fights breaking out in queues for water or at the crowded food centers. In this ruthless fight for survival, our humanity seemed to be slowly ebbing away. Yet amidst the chaos, Kamau and I found solace in each other. Our love was the one thing that the harsh reality of Nairobi could not erode. We dreamt of better days, of escaping the confines of the city, of finding a place where we could breathe freely. We clung to each other, our love the only constant in a world that was changing too rapidly, too brutally. As the months turned into years, our dreams of returning to our farm faded away. Our village was now a ghost town, another casualty of the climate breakdown. Nairobi was our reality now, a ruthless, relentless entity that held us in its iron embrace. Our days were a blur of long working hours, queues for water and food, and sleepless nights in our tiny, stifling shack. Despite the harshness of our existence, I found strength in Kamau's unwavering faith in our love, in our ability to survive. His smile was my beacon of hope, his touch my sanctuary. Each day we woke up with the resolve to face our struggles, to fight another day. This was our life now, a far cry from the blissful days under the African sun. But little did we know, our journey was just beginning. The iron grip of Nairobi was only the first of many challenges we would face. A new fight for survival awaited us, a journey that would test our love and resilience beyond our wildest imagination.
This is chapter 1 of a 6-part short story. Stay tuned for chapter 2.
Chapter 2: Desperation and Survival. We needed to get out of Nairobi. Standing on the precipice of despair, the chaotic streets of Nairobi unfolded before us, each alley echoing with our desperation to escape. The city, once a beacon of hope, had revealed its true face, a labyrinth of danger, where each step could lead to salvation or peril. This is the crucible in which our resolve was tested, where our dreams of a better life were pitted against the reality of human cruelty and indifference. Our journey from the dusty streets of Nairobi to the perilous deserts of Sahara was not merely a geographical shift, but a descent into the depths of our own fears and hopes. This is our story, a testament to our survival, our fight against the odds, and our unyielding hope for a brighter future. It was the 3rd year since our painful farewell to our beloved village, the 3rd year since we became reluctant residents of Nairobi's teeming slum, Kibera. As I woke up each morning to the discordant symphony of the city, I often found myself yearning for the soothing melodies of our farm, the cooing of the doves, the rustling of the maize leaves in the breeze, the soft murmur of the river. Yet amidst the cacophony, the scent of burning jiko stoves and the clamor of awakening lives, Kamau and I found our rhythm, our harmony. In the harsh landscape of Kibera, dreams were a luxury we could barely afford. Yet every night, as we huddled together in our cramped shack, we allowed ourselves to dream. Dreams of verdant fields under the open sky, of the sun warming our backs as we worked the land, of laughter-filled meals under the shade of our mango tree. Our dreams were echoes of a life we once had, a life we yearned for with every fiber of our being. Life in Nairobi was a relentless, unending struggle, but amidst the scarcity and conflict, our bond only strengthened. Kamau became my anchor, my safe haven in the storm. Despite his own battles, he always found a way to soothe my worries, to ignite a flicker of hope in the bleakness. Each night, as we shared our meager meal, he'd reach across and squeeze my hand, his eyes echoing a silent promise. A promise that we'd get through this, that our love would see us through. His strength became my strength, his resilience my motivation. In the sea of nameless, struggling faces, we became each other's identity. Kamau was no longer just a labourer, bending under the weight of his load, and I was not just a domestic help, my hands raw and chapped from ceaseless scrubbing. We were Amina and Kamau, a couple forged and united by love, battling the onslaught of life's harshest realities. Our struggles were many, the odds stacked against us. Yet, we found joy in the simplest things. A moment of shared laughter when a monkey stole a vendor's banana, the warm satisfaction of a full stomach after a day of toil, the soothing melodies Kamau coaxed out of his nyatiti after a particularly hard day. Our love story was no longer simple, but it was ours, and it was real. It was a love not just of stolen kisses and shared dreams, but of shared pain and relentless hope. Food and water were scarce, the lines seemingly endless. Often we would stand for hours only to be met with the disappointing news of stocks running out. Conflict was a constant companion, the desperation making people ruthless, compassion a forgotten concept. Yet, even in these testing times, we found ways to support each other. Kamau would often give up his share of water for me, his lips parched, but his eyes filled with determination, and I would save him the larger portion of our meal, my stomach growling, but my heart content. We clung to each other in this ruthless world, our love the only thing that hadn't been tainted by the grim reality of our existence. Despite the weight of our trials, we dared to hope, to dream of better days. Our dreams were our escape, our refuge from the harsh reality that each dawn brought. As we journeyed through the trials of our third year in Nairobi, we held on to the echoes of our lost dreams, fueling our hope for a better tomorrow. The memories of our life under the African sun became a beacon, guiding us through the maze of slum alleyways, the mounds of uncollected garbage, the long queues for water and food. We found strength in our shared past, our love, and our dreams. They were our lifeline, our shared secret, a balm to our weary souls. But even as we navigated the challenges of city life, another reality was taking shape. A reality that would pull us from Nairobi's iron grasp and cast us into an even more uncertain future. As the echo of our dreams filled our sleep-filled nights, we were blissfully unaware of the storms that were brewing, of the journey that still lay ahead. The world had more trials in store for us, trials that would test our resolve, our love, and our very survival. As our fourth year in Nairobi drew to a close, a chilling sense of desperation began to consume us. We realized that the city had nothing more to offer us but unending strife and despair. We saw our dreams of returning to our farm gradually evaporate, replaced by a stark reality that was far from what we had ever envisioned. Hope was a dim light at the end of a seemingly infinite tunnel. It was a casual conversation that sparked the seed of an audacious idea. I had heard tales from other maids in the houses I worked, stories of families who had left Kenya, braved treacherous journeys across continents, and found better lives in Europe. At first, it seemed unthinkable. But as we weighed our dwindling options, the unthinkable gradually became our only choice. Our dreams shifted from fields of maize to foreign lands of opportunity. This was our leap into the unknown, a gamble with our very lives, but one we saw no alternative to. Once the decision was made, things moved quickly. Using all our savings and selling off what few possessions we had, we contacted a man known only as Django. He was a shadowy figure, a human trafficker who promised passage to Europe. The moment we handed over our money to him, we felt a sense of foreboding. There was a cruelty in his eyes that made my heart pound in fear. But by then, there was no turning back. We were swept into a torrent we had no control over. Django was as ruthless as the tales described. We, along with other desperate families and individuals, were herded like cattle into a decrepit truck, the air heavy with fear and uncertainty. The journey through Kenya and into Ethiopia was grueling. We were packed so tightly that it was hard to breathe, let alone move. The truck jostled on uneven roads, its harsh metal confines offering no respite. We could only imagine the world outside through the thin slits of the truck's hold, a world we were leaving behind. In Ethiopia, we were handed over to another set of traffickers, even more ruthless than Django. They led us on a perilous trek across the arid expanse of the Sahara. The desert was relentless, its heat unbearable, the nights chilling. Many collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, left behind to an inevitable fate. Yet we kept going, spurred by a glimmer of hope, a promise of a better life. We found ourselves clinging to each other, our bodies exhausted, but our spirits unwilling to break. We shared the last drops of our water, rationed our food, whispered words of comfort and love to keep each other sane amidst the horror that unfolded around us. Each step forward was a step away from the life we had known, yet a step back was impossible. When we finally reached Libya, we thought the worst was behind us. We were so wrong. The smugglers herded us into a dilapidated warehouse, our prison, until we were smuggled into a boat to cross the Mediterranean. The conditions were abhorrent, filth everywhere, scarce food, barely any water, and a constant undercurrent of violence. Women were particularly vulnerable, and I shudder to recall the horrifying incidents I had to endure. The boat journey was the most terrifying ordeal. We were packed onto an inflatable raft, barely able to float, let alone sail across the tumultuous Mediterranean. As we set sail under the cover of night, we were leaving behind a continent we called home, heading into the vast unknown. As we floated in the pitch-black night, the boat rocking dangerously with each wave, we huddled together, our bodies trembling from cold and fear. Kamo's arms around me were the only comfort in that harrowing journey. He whispered words of love and promises of better days. Despite the horrors we had endured, and those that were yet to come, his voice was my beacon in the darkness. But with every sunrise and sunset, we drifted further from the world we knew and closer to a future that was uncertain and terrifying. This leap into the unknown had indeed plunged us into a world of horrors we could never have imagined. We were ensnared in a vicious trap, each step forward only leading to more peril. Yet, we could not turn back. Our path was set, our fate sealed. We were caught in a journey that was no longer ours, a journey where we had lost control. But no matter how horrific the path became, we clung to our love, our hope, and the promise of a better life. It was all we had left.
This is chapter 2 of a 6-part short story. Please stay tuned for chapter 3.
Chapter 3. Libya and the Sahara. The price of passage. In the merciless expanses of the Sahara, every grain of sand seemed to conspire against us, threatening to bury our hopes beneath its weight. The horizon stretched endlessly, a mirage that danced just out of reach, mirroring our elusive dreams of sanctuary. Libya loomed before us, a land fraught with perils that would test the very limits of our human spirit. Our journey across these hostile landscapes was not merely a fight for survival, but a stark confrontation with the cost of our passage to freedom. This is the heart-rending tale of our passage through Libya and the Sahara, a harrowing odyssey that demanded a price we were not prepared to pay. In these pages you will walk beside us, feeling the heat of the desert sun and the cold grip of fear as we navigate a land where humanity is often the first casualty. The day we set foot on the edge of the Sahara, a hushed dread seemed to descend upon our group. The dunes rose around us like great waves frozen in time, the relentless sun reflecting harshly off the shifting sands. Kamau tightened his grip on my hand, our silent vow to face whatever lay ahead together. Our journey through the Sahara was a grueling test of our endurance and resilience. The desert was a world devoid of mercy, its days blisteringly hot and its nights bitterly cold. Dehydration became our constant companion, the scarcity of water a cruel reminder of our predicament. Each day the sun rose like a ruthless dictator, its heat oppressive, reducing us to mere shadows trudging through the endless expanse. Hope, that fragile thing that had sparked our journey, was dwindling with each passing day. The desert seemed to stretch infinitely, its horizon a cruel mirage that kept moving further away. But it was in these dire circumstances that our love, our bond, was truly tested. We supported each other through the relentless march, shared our dwindling water supplies, shielded each other from the sandstorms. We clung on to each other through the frigid nights, our shared warmth a small comfort against the cold that seeped into our bones. And when one of us faltered, the other would lend their strength, pull them back onto their feet, and encourage them to take another step. Every night, as we lay huddled together under the star-studded canopy, I saw the fear in Kamau's eyes, a fear he tried to mask for my sake. And he saw the tears that I tried to hide, the tears that came unbidden as the enormity of our situation sank in. Yet, in these vulnerable moments, our connection deepened. We found solace in each other's presence, our whispered words of comfort a soothing balm to our weary souls. There were times when I felt my strength wane, my hope flicker, my resolve crumble. But then, Kamau would squeeze my hand, look into my eyes, and I would see a spark in his that reignited my own. We became each other's beacon, guiding each other through the endless dunes, through our despair, our fear, our uncertainty. But even as we braved the physical hardships of our journey, the emotional toll was equally, if not more, severe. We had left behind everything we knew and loved, had become specks in the vastness of the Sahara, our existence as fleeting and unstable as the shifting sands beneath our feet. Yet we held on to each other, our love the only constant in our rapidly changing world. The Sahara had pushed us to the brink, tested us in ways we could never have imagined. It had drained our bodies, broken our spirits, and brought us face to face with our deepest fears. Yet, through it all, our love endured. It was the one thing the desert couldn't take away, the one thing that kept us going. Our journey through the Sahara was a testament to our endurance, our hope, and the unbreakable strength of our love. It was a cruel baptism by fire that forged us into hardened survivors, our bond more profound and unshakable than ever. It was an ordeal that would forever be etched into our souls, a brutal reminder of our leap into the unknown. But despite the trials and tribulations, we pressed on, our eyes fixed on the horizon, our hearts beating in sync with a single thought: a better life lay ahead, and we would reach it together. The year was 2021, when we first stepped foot into Libya. At the brink of what felt like an abyss, we held on to each other, oblivious to the horrors that awaited us. We had survived the harshness of the Sahara, only to be plunged into a different kind of nightmare. Libya, a country mired in conflict and lawlessness, proved to be our cruel purgatory, an inescapable limbo that was set to test our resolve further. After weeks in the desert, we were introduced to another set of traffickers, a gang led by a burly bearded man named Fathi. He was as merciless as the desert we had just traversed. His warehouse, a decrepit building in the heart of Tripoli, became our prison, its squalid conditions a far cry from the home we had left behind. Fathi exploited us without a shred of remorse. Kamau was forced into hard labor, his body bearing the scars of unending toil and brutal beatings. I saw him growing weaker, his eyes losing their spark, his spirit bruised but not broken. His only solace was our stolen moments together, brief interludes in our ordeal where we could hold each other, renew our vows of love and share our hopes of escape. For me, the torment was different but equally degrading. Fathi forced me into prostitution, an act that shattered my dignity, and left me with wounds deeper than any physical hurt. Night after night, I had to endure the lecherous gaze and cruel touch of strange men, my spirit crushed under the weight of my predicament. Yet in our darkest hours, it was our love for each other that became our beacon of hope. Our stolen moments of solace became our lifeline, our quiet acts of defiance against the dehumanization we were subjected to. Kamau's love and respect for me never wavered, and he became my source of strength, his comforting words and gentle touch a balm to my traumatized soul. Similarly, I saw Kamau find solace in my unwavering faith in him. My love, a fuel that kept his flame of resistance burning. In this cruel limbo, we spent the best part of a year. Every dirham we earned, every favor we could barter, we hoarded with a single-minded focus, earning our passage across the Mediterranean. We clung to this hope, this singular goal, even as our bodies were exploited and our spirits ground down. Finally, in the year 2022, after enduring what felt like a lifetime of torment, we had gathered enough for our passage, but our relief was short-lived. As we prepared to embark on the next leg of our journey, Fatih delivered another blow. Our passage, he informed us coldly, was not together. We were to be put on separate boats. I will never forget that moment. The world seemed to crash around us as we clung to each other, our hearts breaking at the thought of separation. We had faced the worst horrors, endured unspeakable pain, but always together. Now, we were to face the unknown alone, our futures uncertain. But even in our despair, we made a promise. We would find each other again, in a land free from the horrors we had endured. This separation was only temporary. It had to be. We couldn't fathom any other outcome. As the guards pulled us apart, our eyes locked, conveying what our hearts couldn't bear to voice. A goodbye that was not a goodbye, a promise of reunion. And so, with heavy hearts and tear-streaked faces, we stepped onto separate paths, our journey taking a cruel, unexpected turn.
This is chapter 3 of a 6-part short story. Please stay tuned for chapter 4.
Chapter 4. The Mediterranean Crossing Without Kamau. Staring into the abyss of the Mediterranean, my heart ached with the absence of Kamau, my pillar of strength. The once inviting blue waters transformed into an unforgiving expanse, ready to claim dreams and lives alike. Each wave was a reminder of the distance between us and the perilous journey that lay ahead. Crossing the Mediterranean was a gamble with fate, a treacherous passage that promised no safe harbor on the other side. As our boat rocked and swayed, I felt my resolve waver, but the fire of hope burned fiercely within. This is the story of my lonely crossing of the Mediterranean, an odyssey marked by the haunting absence of my beloved Kamau and the ceaseless pursuit of a dream that always seemed just beyond the horizon. Come, immerse yourself in my tale, and feel the salt spray and the sting of separation as we navigate through the stormy waters of this perilous journey. The year was still 2022, when I found myself on the edge of the Mediterranean, my heart heavy with the separation from Kamau. The vastness of the sea seemed to mock the despair in my heart, its rolling waves a grim reminder of the perilous journey ahead. Our boat was nothing more than an overcrowded dinghy, a vessel ill-suited to the harshness of the sea. There were too many of us, all desperate souls hoping to escape the horrors of the past and fearful of the unknown future. As we set sail under the cover of darkness, I clung to a picture of Kamau, a last-minute gift he had managed to sneak to me before we were torn apart. The journey across the Mediterranean was a brutal one. We battled unforgiving winds and monstrous waves. Our fragile boat tossed around like a toy. The cold was biting, seeping into our bones, and the constant spray of the salty sea stung our faces and eyes. Some days the sea would fall eerily calm, a sinister tranquility that was more terrifying than the most tempestuous storm. People fell sick, their bodies too frail to handle the harsh conditions. There were no medical supplies, no help. We could only watch in helpless despair as fellow travelers succumbed to their ailments, their dreams of a new life dying with them. The feeling of utter helplessness, of being at the mercy of the sea and the indifference of the world, was overwhelming. I clung on to hope, whispering prayers for Kamau and myself. I found myself staring into the horizon, straining my eyes for a glimpse of land, of rescue. There were days when I wanted to give up, to let go of the struggle. But each time, my hand would instinctively clutch at Kamau's picture, the smiling face in the worn-out photograph, reminding me of the promise we had made to each other. The indifference of the world was as stark and chilling as the sea around us. We were mere statistics in the growing refugee crisis, our lives reduced to faceless numbers in news reports. It seemed the world had chosen to look away, oblivious or apathetic to our plight. Yet we held on, driven by desperation, by hope, by the need to survive. After what felt like an eternity, land came into sight. Cheers erupted around me, tears of relief flowing freely. We had made it across the Mediterranean, but the joy was bittersweet. For every cheer there was a silence, a life lost to the sea, a dream drowned. And for me there was an ache, a void where Kamau should have been. The year was now 2023, and as I stepped onto the shores of Italy, a new chapter of my journey began. I had survived the horrors of Libya and the unforgiving Mediterranean, but I was alone, Kamau's fate unknown, our future uncertain. As I was herded into a detention center, my heart clung to the hope that Kamau was safe, that our paths would converge again. Until then, I had to endure, for both of us. I found myself navigating the labyrinthine streets of Italy, alone and terrified. The euphoria of reaching land was short-lived, replaced quickly by the cold, hard realities of life as an illegal immigrant. After days spent in the crowded detention center, I was released, turned out into the streets with nothing but a warning and the clothes on my back. The Italian authorities were overwhelmed, their resources stretched thin by the influx of refugees. In their eyes, we were a problem they didn't want to deal with, a nuisance to be tolerated at best. I tried to find work, knocking on countless doors, pleading for mercy, for understanding, but the response was the same everywhere I went. Cold refusals, disdainful glares, doors slammed shut. The local populace, besieged by their own economic struggles and weary of the influx of refugees, met us with hostility and apathy. Language was a major hurdle. I could not communicate my desperation, my need. Every interaction was a struggle, fraught with misunderstanding and frustration. But I persevered, picking up words and phrases, determined to not let language be yet another wall between me and survival. Life in Italy was a far cry from the dreams I had harbored of Europe. The picturesque streets and grandeur of the historic cities were overshadowed by the harsh realities of life as an outcast. I lived in fear, constantly on edge, wary of authorities, and at the mercy of the occasional kindness of strangers. Throughout it all, the uncertainty surrounding Kamau's fate weighed heavily on my heart. I had no way of knowing if he was safe, if he had made it across the Mediterranean. Every news report of a refugee boat disaster sent a jolt of terror through me. But in my heart, I clung to the hope that he was alive, somewhere out there, searching for me just as desperately as I was for him. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford. I spent my nights in abandoned buildings, huddled together with other refugees. The cold Italian nights were long and unforgiving, and sleep, when it came, was filled with nightmares of the horrors I had endured. Despite the hardships, I kept going, driven by the promise Kamau and I had made to each other. I tried to gather money for my onward journey, working odd jobs, surviving on scraps. The streets of Italy were cruel, but I had seen and survived worse. By the time the summer of 2023 was in full swing, I had managed to save just enough for the next leg of my journey. My aim was clear. I had to reach England. In my heart, I felt Kamau would head there too. I was no stranger to the ruthlessness of human traffickers by now. I knew the risks, the cost, but there was no turning back. My journey, as terrifying and lonely as it was, had to continue.
This is chapter 4 of a 6-part short story. Please stay tuned for chapter 5.
Chapter 5. The Road Through Europe and the Channel Crossing. Under the shadows of the Eiffel Tower and amidst the bustling streets of Paris, I found myself lost and alone, with the weight of Europe on my shoulders. The road through Europe was a labyrinth of challenges, a test of my resilience and faith in humanity. Each step forward was a reminder of the absence of Kamau, the love I left behind. The Channel, a tumultuous divide, stood before me as the final hurdle to England, the promised land that held the possibility of reunification with Kamau. But as I stood on the precipice, facing the violent waves and the vigilant eyes of the border patrol, the path ahead seemed insurmountable. Join me as I recount the trials and tribulations of traversing through Europe and facing the final showdown at the Channel. Walk beside me as I navigate through the alien streets, confront the hostile faces, and grapple with the incessant tide of uncertainty and fear. This is the story of my journey, a testament to the indomitable spirit of survival and the unyielding hope that fuels the quest for a better future. Summer bloomed across Europe in all its glory, but for me, it brought little cheer. The year 2023 was proving to be as harsh and unforgiving as the ones that had come before it. The journey from Italy to France was fraught with risks. I found myself at the mercy of smugglers once more, my life amounting to nothing more than a few €100 to them. The back of their unventilated truck became my world for those horrifying hours, packed with other desperate souls like myself. The sickening smell of sweat and fear hung heavily in the air as the truck hurtled through the perilous routes. I emerged in France, a country renowned for its culture and sophistication. Yet to me, it represented yet another harsh landscape of indifference. My life became a brutal routine of searching for work, dodging authorities, and enduring the cold gaze of the locals. While the city buzzed with the energy of the summer tourists, enjoying the best of what Europe had to offer, I was confined to the shadows, invisible and unwanted. Sleep was scarce, rest a fleeting memory. I found shelter in makeshift refugee camps on the outskirts of Paris. While the city of love and light sparkled in the distance, we huddled together for warmth, our dreams of a safe haven dwindling with each passing day. The scars of exploitation were etched deep into my spirit, but it was the indifference that stung the most. These were the countries, the cities whose relentless industrialization had contributed to the devastation of my homeland, forcing us to abandon our homes and embark on this dangerous journey. Yet, they seemed oblivious to the chaos their actions had caused, the lives they had upended. I couldn't help but feel a bitter irony in the fact that these lands, so lush and rich, were the ones most indifferent to my plight. The same countries that had polluted and pillaged without thought were now closing their doors to us, ignoring the human catastrophe they had played a part in creating. In those lonely weeks in France, Kamau's absence was a gaping hole in my heart. I found myself speaking to his photograph, recounting my day, the people I'd met, the hardships I'd faced. His silent presence became my solace, his memory a beacon guiding me through my darkest days. Despite the tribulations, the goal remained clear. I needed to get to England. In my heart, I was convinced Kamau would make the same journey. It was a desperate hope, one that was often shaken by the harsh realities of my journey, but it was all I had. As summer inched towards its peak, I found myself boarding yet another cramped vehicle, my hopes pinned on reaching England. The English Channel lay ahead, a stretch of water that held the promise of a reunion, of a life where Kamau and I could be together once more. The dangers were many, the odds unfavorable, but I was ready to face it all. For Kamau, for us. The English Channel, a strip of water that stood as the final obstacle between me and my destination. I had crossed deserts, survived a dangerous sea journey, and traversed foreign lands, but this final stretch filled me with more dread than ever. It wasn't just the physical distance, but the emotional chasm it represented, the uncertainty of Kamau's fate, and the overwhelming fear of what awaited on the other side. We were crammed into a small dinghy in the dead of night, our only guide the dim glow of a handheld GPS. Around me, huddled figures clung desperately to each other, eyes wide with fear. The sound of the engine was drowned out by the thundering of my heartbeat. I held on tightly to Kamau's photo, whispering prayers into the cold night. As dawn broke, we spotted the shadowy outline of the English coastline. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Suddenly there was shouting, frantic pointing. Through the morning mist, I saw them, a group of figures on the beach, waving angrily. Vigilantes. Their shouts reached us over the water, a barrage of hateful words and threats. They were in a small motorboat speeding towards us. Panic ensued. People screamed, huddling closer. The boat rocked dangerously as they tried to capsize us. Their faces were twisted with anger, but I saw no humanity in their eyes. Here, on the shores of a land that promised safety, we were met with hostility. In the chaos, the dinghy tipped. People fell into the icy waters. The sound of their screams will haunt me forever. I clung to the boat, my fingers numb, gasping as the cold water lapped at my legs. The vigilantes seemed to enjoy our terror, their laughter echoing over the water. Then, in the distance, a siren. A Coast Guard vessel approached, its lights cutting through the morning mist. The vigilantes retreated, but the damage was done. Our boat was sinking. People were in the water, struggling. I kicked, swam, fought. The water was freezing, my limbs growing heavy, but I couldn't give up, not when I was this close. I thought of Kamau, the promise we'd made. I wouldn't let this be the end of our story. I wouldn't let the sea claim me. With a final surge of strength, I reached the beach, collapsing onto the cold sand, gasping. The Coast Guards were helping the others, pulling them to safety. I lay there, shivering, looking back at the turbulent waters that had almost claimed my life. England had welcomed me with its harshest face. Yet I was here. I had made it. In the days that followed, I was processed, questioned, moved. I ended up in a detention center surrounded by high walls and watchful guards. England, the promised land, was nothing like I'd imagined. But then again, nothing about this journey had been. As I settled into this new reality, one question burned in my heart. Where was Kamau? Was he alive? Did he make it? As the days turned into weeks, my hopes dimmed. I was in England, but I felt more lost than ever. The last divide had been crossed, but my journey felt far from over.
This is chapter 5 of a 6-part short story. Please stay tuned for chapter 6, the final chapter.
Chapter 6. London's Cold. Welcome and deportation to Rwanda. Standing on the wet streets of London, the cold rain washing over me, I felt a chill that penetrated deep into my bones. It was not just the harsh English weather, but the icy stares and the frosty reception from the people who were supposed to protect me. My dreams of finding sanctuary in this land of opportunity were shattered as I faced the stark reality of being an unwanted outsider. The walls of bureaucracy and apathy closed in on me, and the threat of deportation to Rwanda hung over me like a dark cloud. This is the story of my struggle in London, a city that offered no warmth or comfort, and my fight against the system that sought to send me back to the very place I had fled. Join me as I navigate through the labyrinth of immigration laws, face the hostile environment, and confront the harsh reality of being a refugee in a foreign land. This is the final chapter of my journey, a testament to my determination to survive and my hope for a brighter future. London, a city of dreams, had always seemed like a beacon of hope in the stories I'd heard. But the city I found myself in was vastly different from those tales. Its historic grandeur was eclipsed by the chilling indifference I met at every corner. It was the summer of 2023, a year that marked the culmination of my harrowing journey. Here I was, amidst the thrumming heart of England, living in the cold shadows cast by its towering structures. I was lodged in a cramped hostel for asylum seekers on the fringes of the city. The dingy rooms and peeling wallpaper were a stark contrast to the picture-perfect London from postcards. The strict curfews and endless rules made it feel less like a refuge and more like a prison. Here, I was just another statistic, a faceless asylum seeker amidst countless others, living in constant fear of deportation. The asylum process was a complex labyrinth of paperwork, interviews, and ceaseless waiting. I found myself embroiled in a system that was far from empathetic. A sense of despair seeped into my days, as the longing for Kamau was coupled with the harsh reality of my present. Around me, I saw the apathy of the system, how it ground down the spirits of those like me, who had risked everything in search of a better life. The hard-set faces of the officials and their toneless voices reminded me that I was just a number to them, another case to be processed. Despite the bustling city life outside, I was trapped in a limbo, caught between the horrors of my past and the uncertainties of my future. I was free from the clutches of smugglers and the merciless desert heat. Yet I found myself yearning for the warmth of the Kenyan sun, the soft rustle of our maize farm, and Kamau's laughter. The heart of London, with its dazzling lights and ceaseless energy, felt like a world apart. The indifference of the city was evident in the way it overlooked us, in the way it moved on, oblivious to our plight. As days blurred into weeks, my resolve hardened. I refused to let this city break me. I decided to fight for my right to live here, for my right to a safe and secure life. I joined English language classes, participated in asylum seeker support groups, and volunteered at a community centre. I missed Kamau with every fibre of my being, but his memory steeled my determination. He would not want me to give up, to let the apathy of others define my fate. He would want me to rise, to fight, to survive. Every night, as I stared at the London skyline from my small window, I whispered a silent prayer into the cold city air, for safety, for acceptance, for a future where I wouldn't have to hide in the shadows, for Kamau, wherever he was. One fateful day, our hostel was raided. The firm knock on the door, the stern faces of the immigration officers, the terrified faces of my fellow asylum seekers. It all happened so fast. I was rounded up like so many others and taken to a detention center. A new layer of fear added to an already uncertain future. Rwanda, one of the officers had said when I asked about my fate. My heart dropped at the word. I was being deported back to Africa, the continent I had risked everything to escape. Rwanda, a country unfamiliar to me, a place where I had no ties, no family. As I waited in the detention center, I couldn't help but think of my journey, of Kamau, my love, my anchor, our small farm in Kenya, our dreams, our hopes, our life together before it was disrupted by the unforgiving tides of climate change. How we had laughed and loved, worked under the African sun, the simple joy of our shared dreams, and how it had all been replaced with fear, uncertainty, and a fight for survival. Each part of our journey, each heart-wrenching decision had been necessary for survival. If we had stayed in Kenya, in our drought-ravaged village, we would have starved. The land that had once nurtured us had turned against us, its once fertile soil reduced to dust. The city, the Sahara, the smugglers, the Mediterranean, the vigilantes. We had faced them all in our quest for survival. Now I was staring at the possibility of being thrown back into the same inhospitable Africa we had fled. I felt a sense of despair, of anger. This was my story, my struggle. But I was not alone. I was one of the millions, people who had been displaced by the effects of climate change, by the indifference of the world. As our lands become hotter, our crops failed. More and more people would face the same decisions, the same journey, the same fear. I clung to Kamau's photograph, his smiling face a sharp contrast to my grim reality. If he were here, I knew he would tell me to keep fighting, to keep hoping. His absence was a deep wound in my heart, one that never seemed to heal. This was my story, the story of Amina, a 24-year-old woman from Kenya, a climate refugee, an asylum seeker in a world that seemed to have forgotten about humanity. A woman who had crossed deserts and seas, who had faced smugglers and vigilantes, only to be facing deportation to Rwanda. As I sat in the cold confines of the detention center, the weight of my journey bore down on me. Every step I had taken from the parched soils of Kenya to the bustling streets of the UK had been driven by hope. Hope for a better life, hope for a world that recognized the dire realities of climate change. Our story was but one among countless others, a mosaic of tales of resilience and desperation, all spurred by the relentless tide of a warming planet. The world was shifting, and while I had been pushed by the cruel gusts of man-made climate breakdown, there were millions more, whispers of stories that echoed my own, waiting in the wings. Coastal communities in Bangladesh and the Pacific Islands are already losing their homes to rising seas. Farmers in the Sahel are watching their lands turn to dust, and people in the Arctic are witnessing their world literally melt away. As dusk crept over the detention center, the horizon painted with hues of fading hope, I clenched my fists with renewed resolve. This was not the end. The setting sun was a poignant reminder of the waning time we have left to address the root cause of our plight. I vowed, with every fiber of my being, to persist and to resist. For my husband, Kamau, for myself, and for every Amina and Kamau in increasing numbers that would inevitably tread this path in the future. If we don't confront and rectify the ravages of climate breakdown, it might not be long before it's not just people like me making such perilous journeys, but perhaps you, your children, or your children's children. Let this story serve as a clarion call, urging us all to unite in the fight against climate breakdown and to protect our planet for future generations.
This is Chapter 6, the final chapter of a 6-part short story. If you have enjoyed this story and would like to hear other stories of love, romance, heartache, cheating and betrayal, why not subscribe to the Romance Diaries on YouTube? And if you hit the little notification bell at the same time, we can let you know every time we bring out a new story. If you would like to experience your own real-life romance, why not click on one of our sponsors in the description below?